Awesome. So again, our webinar today is focused on trust, the currency of high velocity results. And I will be your host for today. My name is Egwon Owie. I serve as the marketing lead and client partner at Franklin Covey Nigeria. And I'm really excited to be here with you. But tell me, have you had the opportunity to be in any of our Franklin Covey webinars or framework solutions before? Please go ahead and type in chat yes or no. I'd love to know. Let me know in chat. Have you had the opportunity to be in our sessions before? You know Franklin Covey? Ever had the opportunity to engage with us? Okay, let's see. I see the thoughts coming. Yes, my first time. Welcome, Shino. Good to have you. Bosse, wow, good to have
Thank
you all.
you.
Please go ahead and keep it coming in. Thank you. Okay, so today I'll tell you a little bit about Franklin Covey Nigeria, at least for the benefit of those who have not had the opportunity to join us before. We'll talk a little bit about why we are here, and then we will really do a deep dive. I have a really good consultant on the call who will take you on the journey, and I hope you're ready for it. And then tell you a little bit about what we do at Franklin Covey as a part of our offerings. We'll take some feedback, answer your questions, and then we'll wrap it up. I know that it's 1 hour, but it's going to fly so fast you won't even know. So let's jump in. What are we about? At Franklin Covey, we say our mission is to enable greatness in people and organizations everywhere. People and organizations everywhere. And we've done this for 40 years and counting. We have developed over 30 million leaders, served in over 160 countries, continue to research or to invest in research. And of course, we are reaching everywhere in the world. In our journey, researching leadership and how to help people change behavior, we identified 4 important areas where the highest performing organizations focus. And these are the areas where we as an organization help clients. These are the challenges that matter the most. The first is developing exceptional leaders at every level. The second is instilling habits of effectiveness in every individual. The third, which we're going to be focusing on today, is building an inclusive high trust culture. The fourth, of course, but not the least, is using a common execution framework to pursue your most important goals. So, why are we here? Take a look at this data with me, and it comes from Microsoft. Employees report that they are productive at work. 87% of them did report that they were productive at work. And 12% of their leaders say they have full confidence in their team's productivity. What a disparity. I think I'm productive, and my manager thinks I'm not productive. I'm sure you can see the gap is really wide. And so, in the words of Stephen Covey, if you want to go far and fast, we must go together with trust. I know you know the anonymous quote. I think it's an African proverb that says, "If you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go with. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others." But what Stephen Covey recoined is that if you want to go far and fast, you need to go together and to go together with trust. Having said that, I'd like to take you to this point where we can talk about my consultant who's going to be working with us today, Tony Osime. He's a consultant with the Franklin Covey Nigeria. Let me tell you a little bit about him. I mean, so that kind of helps you understand who we have in the room, right? Okay, so give me a second. Mr. Tony Osime has had the opportunity to serve in quite a number of industries, one being banking and finance, has a lot of experience in consulting. He's a renowned executive coach, consultant, and facilitator with over 20 years of experience in finance and banking, as well as 6 years plus in consulting. His career began with the Chase Manhattan Bank, and he managed major accounts. And his passion drove him to training, where he has led the design and delivery of sought after courses. He has been entrusted with leading distressed banks. So he can bring you from down inside the river up and out and thriving again. So today he continues to focus on executive coaching, training, and consulting, and definitely brings a wealth of experience and practical insights to every engagement. Join me and give some, rousing welcome. Please feel free to use the emojis, throw them out there, and help me welcome Mr. Tony Osime. Tony Osime, over to you. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, Mr. Tony. I think you're muted.
Okay, so I was muted when I was saying thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. Good to have
Right,
you.
excellent. So I'll share my screen and we can get straight into the slides. So sharing my screen, and I hope you can see my screen. Then I'll put my slides on slideshow mode. And I'll just change the display settings so that we're seeing the presentation view. Okay, so great. So good day, everyone. It's my pleasure to take you through our session today, and it's on trust. You see the title, The Currency of High Velocity Results. So by the end of today, by the end of this session, I'll almost guarantee you'll have a new understanding of trust. And this understanding will help you achieve extraordinary results. Okay? So we're going to look at insights from the full Franklin Covey Nigeria program on trust. These are just highlights of the full program. Before we start, can you type in the chat, what does trust mean to you? And put it in one sentence. Don't go more than one sentence. What does trust mean to you? I'm looking at the chat and I'll look for, oh, somebody said one word, integrity. Excellent. That is an important aspect of trust, integrity. But is it more than integrity? I'm going to ask Shina, who gave us integrity, is it more than integrity? Give us a sentence if you think it's more than integrity. Okay. Now, while others are putting in their sentences on what trust means, I'll continue. Okay, somebody says it means you can rely on someone, the ability to depend on somebody. Excellent. So we see that dependency is an element of trust. Excellent. Let's move on. Now, I've got something interesting for you, and maybe it's startling. And I'm going to say that every organization in Nigeria is currently paying a hidden tax. And it's not in your financial statements, but it's in the delays, approvals, and missed opportunities. And I'm going to call this the trust tax. Trust tax. We're going to repeat this as we go along. And most leaders, most teams are paying millions of naira for it without realizing that there's a hidden tax. Today, I'll show you how to see this hidden tax. I'll show you how to measure it and how to remove it. Now, just in case you have a sense of this, can you type in the chat, how much do you think your organization is paying in trust taxes each year? Take a guess. In other words, how would you value the delays in approval? How would you value slow decision making? How would you value rework and duplication? How would you value missed opportunities? Give me a number in 1 year that your organization spends on this. Okay, let's move on. Now, interestingly, we can apply it to the Nigerian environment. Now, what's it like running a business in Nigeria? What do we experience? We see that prices fluctuate. We see that supply chains are unstable. We see that there are regulatory shifts. There are all kinds of regulations that keep changing. All this is pressure from outside. And this is normal. However, What if I told you that you're also losing from something internal that's invisible? And we're not seeing the impact of this trust on our accounts. In other words, this internal friction is not showing up in our numbers, our daily numbers, our monthly numbers, our annual numbers. And that's what we're going to take a look at today. So what is it we're not seeing? We're not seeing the impact of trust on our results. That's right. It's not visible on our financial statements, but it's present in every single process. Now, at Franklin Covey, we've simplified this understanding of trust, and we make it something measurable. And the way we've simplified it is to say that trust affects two variables. We've broken it down to two simple variables, speed and cost. In a low trust environment, speed is slow and costs are high. That gives you a tax. In other words, there's a cost to low tax. In a high trust environment, speed is high and costs are low. This gives you a dividend. So in a high trust environment, you're experiencing a dividend. Every day, with every extra approval, with every recheck, every duplication, it's a tax you're already paying. Now, let's make a practical example. Let's bring it to real life. Imagine that you have a company and they want to replace parts for their vehicles. Let's look at what happens in a high trust environment. How long does it take to get approval for these spare parts for the trucks? 3 hours. Now, what if it was a low trust environment? How long will it take to get approval for those spare parts? 3 weeks. Big difference. Same company, same steps or same systems, but a big difference in time. What do we notice? What's changed? What we can see is extra steps, extra time delays, extra rechecks. These are all taxes. And we can boil it down to more checks, more signatures, more hesitation. And that delay, we think, is operational. But we're suggesting that there's a better way to see it. And if we see it as a trust failure, it gives us more options for taking action. So when we look at processes, one of the things we realize with our new sense of trust is that most process problems are trust problems. They're trust problems in disguise. Now, if you multiply one problem in one process for one part of your organization, imagine multiplying that by other processes, other departments, for the whole organization. You can see that the costs mount up, and we can see that there's a huge hidden cost. Now, we've got a proposal. There's a trust tax, but let's back it up with some data. In 2015, the Sloan School of Management in MIT, they did a huge survey, and they came up with this data. What is the impact of high trust environments? We're looking at 260% more motivation, 41% lower absenteeism, and 3.6 times the revenue growth. These are huge figures. In other words, they're not just HR metrics, they're specific financial outcomes. And we call these the trust drivers of performance. So what do we see from this? Trust is not soft. It is a performance multiplier. Now, let's move further. There's another aspect of trust. I'm going to call it the trust perception gap. And this is like a blind spot. And this comes up from the same survey, and it looked at how do leaders rate themselves compared to how their followers or their teams rate them. And this was startling. Leaders rate themselves on integrity at 95%. Team followers rate their leaders' integrity at 59%. That is a 36% drop or a deficit. That's a huge gap. It's in that gap that your speed is lost and your costs increase. And we call that, or we understand that trust is based on perception. This gives us a new insight. Trust is based on perception. And it also applies to competence. There's also a gap in competence as well. And there's something that comes from this. We can see that leaders judge their intent. In other words, they know what they're thinking, they know what their goals are, and they think that other people also know this. However, what we see is that teams base their judgment on observation. In other words, it's what they see that matters. And what we learn from this? Trust is not what you mean, it is what people experience. Trust is built through consistent actions from the people you observe. Okay, now let's bring it home. Let's make it personal. Imagine someone you trust. Think of somebody that you trust. Give me one consistent behavior that you notice and type your answer in the chat. Imagine somebody that you trust. What do you notice consistently from them? Put your answer in the chat. Okay, so one answer is that they can be counted upon. In other words, they're reliable. And what I'll infer from this is that they deliver. They deliver results again and again and again. Excellent. So that tells us that trust relies on repeated behavior. I'm seeing that another result is being truthful. In other words, they always tell the truth. And that looks at the character of the person. What's common to all of these? They are all observable behavior. These are all things that we can see. And what do we learn? People trust what they see repeatedly. It's in actions. It's in consistencies. It's also in small moments. All these things count. They all matter for trust. Now, let's look at a simple trust model. And again, this was developed in Franklin Covey. And here we break down trust into two simple components. In fact, we can even answer two simple questions. One, can I trust your intent? And that looks at trust from a perspective of character. Two, can I trust your results? That looks at trust from the perspective of capability. And this is the foundation, this is the simplification of all trust. And trust requires both. Because if any answer to these questions is no, you have a trust problem. Let's take this further. Let's look at a dilemma. I'm going to call it the executive dilemma. Now imagine I'm looking at two directors, Director X and Director Y. These are senior staff in an organization. Director X delivers results, but lacks integrity. Director Y has very high integrity, but lacks capability. Now, assume that you're the one to promote them. Who would you promote? Would you promote X or would you promote Y? You can only promote one person. Type in the chat, would it be X or would it be Y? Write your answer in the chat. Let's take a look at what you think. Imagine you're the managing director of the company and you want to promote one of these to a high position. Aha, I've got one person saying Y, another person saying Y. Ah, 3 people saying Y. Wow, most people are saying Y. Now that's interesting. That's interesting. Because I have to confess, this is a trick question. Because the answer is neither. Neither, because trust requires both. Character without competence leads to frustration. Competence without character leads to resistance. You must have both. And that's the point I wanted to stress. Let's move on. To help us understand trust, we can look at one of the behaviors of trust. Now, in the full program, in the Franklin Covey program, we have 13 behaviors. We'll just look at one of them for now, and we'll look at talk straight. Okay, talk straight. Now, I'm going to say that we know trust is built through behavior, not the intention. And we're going to focus on talk straight. And we're going to use how our communication can bridge the gap between intent and outcome. In other words, we're looking at intent versus behavior. So let's do a little exercise. We want to bridge the gap between intent and behavior. Remember, we said that most executives understand their intent and they score themselves 95%. Most direct reports or team members score them at a much lower level, 36% less. So what we have to do as executives is bridge that gap. How do we bridge it? Now, the exercise I want to give you is this. Think of a conversation you are currently avoiding. What is a sensitive conversation you are currently avoiding? Something that you know you have to say to somebody, but you don't want to say it for one reason or another. What I'd like you to do is to apply this structure. In other words, use this structure for the conversation. Number 1, state the facts without emotion. And these should be the facts to an independent person. In other words, what are the facts as we know them based upon what somebody being independent can observe? That's step 1. Step 2, share your perspective. State how you see the problem. Step 3, declare your intent. Say, what is it that you want to achieve? Let me give you an example. Let me put this into practice. If it was my example, I might say something like this. For step 1, I'll say, we've tried 5 times without success. Those represent the facts. Step 2 is that I'd like to explain how I see it. So here I'm sharing my perspective. Step 3, I'm going to say that my goal is for us to deliver on schedule in the better interests of the organization. That's declaring my intent. So that's how I would state it if I was going to say it to somebody. How would you say it? How would you say it using those 3 steps? Now imagine what would happen if you use those 3 steps, and more importantly, if you declared your intent. The key for me is declaring your intent. That's what really makes the difference. And this is one of the skills you can learn on the full program. Okay, let's move on and let's have a deeper understanding of trust. And what we hear is that, or what we see here is that trust is not built in big speeches. It's not built in directives or memos. Trust is built daily in small moments. In other words, when you keep commitments, when you respect time, when you follow through, all these things build trust. And these are what people remember. They don't remember your intentions. Half the time, they don't know your intentions. They're guessing. But they do remember your actions, and they build these actions into patterns, and it's your patterns that they remember. So what we learn is that trust is built through daily patterns. Now, let's bring this home. Let's look at Nigeria, the Nigerian case. And I'm going to call this the elephant in the room, because in Nigeria, things are very unusual. I'm going to say politely. Things are unusual. How can you build trust in Nigeria when you have a very volatile environment? People will complain about corruption, about power, about traffic, about prices rising all the time. All these represent shocks. They represent things that buffer the organization. How can we build trust in such a situation? Is it possible? And my answer is yes, it is. Rather than focus on what you can't control, these are the external things, the market volatility, the price rises, the regulations. Think of what you can control, manage what you can control. That is the level of trust within your organization. And what are you doing when you do this? What you're doing is creating what I'm going to call a high trust oasis. In other words, in the organization, we have a situation which is very different from the external organization. And how does this affect us? What are the results? What can we expect from this? Well, in that oasis, what happens? We have faster execution within the company. We have better talent retention within the company. We have lower operational costs within the company, and we have stronger partnerships within the company. What does that lead to? Better margins. How does that help? It builds a buffer against the external shocks. In other words, we've moved trust from an external problem into a competitive advantage. My timer is in the background. Okay, so that's something we can look forward to. Now, let's do a little diagnostic. Let's look at the friction, and we want to convert that friction into performance. So I've given you a graphic here. Let's look at the graphic. And I'll ask you a question. Where in your organization do you see slow approvals? Where do you see repetition or rework? Where do you see excessive checking? Where do you see delays in decisions? When you put all these things together, this is what we'll call your trust gaps. These are the areas you can have the biggest improvements in your performance. And what we notice is that all these challenges are fundamentally a trust problem. Every delay, every extra approval, every recheck, it is a tax you are already paying, and it doesn't show up in your accounts. So let's make this practical. And if you were to say, how do I approach doing this? How would I approach it? In other words, how can I make it practical for my organization? And we'll say that these are 3 steps you can take. Diagnose your trust gaps. Build your leadership capability in terms of trust. And then make sure that all the people in your organizations are aligning their behaviors with outcomes based on trust as something that unifies the whole organization. And in doing this, we can make trust practical. So I'm going to make a call to action. If we can identify where trust is slowing down your organization, we can help you convert that friction into speed and performance. And all you have to do is request a one-on-one session with us, and we can give you feedback. In other words, we'll be happy to work with you in solving these trust issues. So I'm going to round off by saying that from what we've learned today, we see that the question is not whether trust is affecting your results. The question is, how much is it costing you? In other words, every delay, every extra approval, every recheck is a tax you already pay. If you want us to help, we would recommend 3 approaches or 3 steps. We suggest a top-down coaching. Start with your most senior executives. Help them to build trust internally within themselves so that they can extend trust to other people. Then we can do a trust audit. We can diagnose where trust is affecting your organization the most, because this is where you'll get the best results. It's where you can apply the most leverage. And step 3 is that we can develop a customized rollout to instill trust in all your people, all your processes, so that you can now start turning the friction points into a trust dividend. So that brings us to the end of our session today, and I'll be happy to take questions. Please put your questions in the chat, and if Ogono will allow, we can maybe allow you to speak the questions as well.
Wow.
You can either write down the questions or you can speak them, and then I'll be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Osimhen. Please, I'd like you to put some emojis up there as to how you're feeling right now. Feel comfortable. I mean, let me see the emojis. Please go ahead and just put thank you, thank you. There are a lot of claps going up, celebration. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, you've really started to shake, some tables here. I mean, when you dived into Nigeria, I'm like, there we go. There are tables to be shaking. If there's, shake the tables. But I mean, the whole idea is not for the sake of it, but to really get, solutions and drive our results forward, right? Considering our team today is trust, the currency of high velocity results. So thank you again, Mr. Tony Osimhen. Really excited that we could start the conversation. So please go ahead and put in chat your questions. We'll come over to Q&A shortly. I'll just talk you through a few more things and then we can come over there to the Q&A. So please, to give you a little bit of time to put in your questions, go ahead and type in chat. And if you want to ask your questions verbally, you can also just um, use the raise hand button and then we can unmute you to ask your questions. Okay, so before we come to the Q&A part, and really thank you so much for the use of time, because I think that the conversations will really come alive even more with the questions. I want to congratulate every one of you. You have won a gift. Yes, so we have a gift for you, and you will get it in your boxes, in your in-mail boxes. It'll come from Franklin Covey, Nigeria. It's just to say thank you for making our time to be here with us, and we hope that this has been of benefit to you. If you want to contact us, our email is right on the screen, info@franklincoveynig.com, or you can call the number or send a WhatsApp to that number on the screen. But let me tell you a little bit about a little more about what we do at Franklin Covey. So at Franklin Covey, we say that great people build great organizations. And for every individual here on this call, you are, I'd say, a subset, right, of a great organization, a potential great organization. So great people are required to build great organizations, and great organizations then build great people. It's sort of like a circle that keeps moving forward. And so when we look at it from a Franklin Covey perspective, there are four areas that we know are very critical. The executives who lead the organization, the mid-level leaders who lead the division, the first-level leaders who lead the team, and the individual contributors who lead themselves. But what is a theme that characterizes a great organization? Four things for us. It's superior sustained performance. It is loyal customers. It's employees that are engaged. And then, of course, distinctive contribution. All of that is pieced together when you have a high performing aligned culture. And so at Franklin Covey, there are a number of frameworks and solutions that we have leveraged to be able to support organizations for the past almost 40 years, like I said. From leadership, we have solutions such as the 6 critical practices for leading a team. This is very powerful for first line managers because they are the ones that are getting results through the frontline staff. We have the multipliers, the 4 essential roles of leadership by 4 senior leaders, leaders of leaders. When it comes to individual effectiveness, the 7 habits of highly effective people is something that I know you probably already know, a framework you already know, but in case you do not know it, yes, it's one that transforms into each individual's effectiveness. Working with AI is one of the tools that we find, one of the frameworks we find very powerful in helping with self-management. 5 choices, um, and so on and so forth. In terms of winning culture, the leading at the speed of trust, which is the framework upon which today's session was produced. We also have the working at the speed of trust. Disrupt everything. I mean, at this point, if you really want to change results, you can't disrupt everything. This is just a number of a few of our very powerful frameworks that I know that will be useful in your organization. And feel free to reach out to us via the email and the number if you need to have this, take the conversation forward. Great. And the last is, and but not the least, is breakthrough results. Yes, for discipline of execution, which was the theme of our last webinar last month. And then, of course, for sales, helping clients succeed. Andrew says some issues may be due to organizational bureaucracies and lackadaisical attitude of team members. Team members and your superior may forget to respond to pending issues, and this can cause repetitions, resubmitting memos, and presentation. Andrew, I believe you could you unmute and maybe ask Mr. Sime your question directly? Because I know you've stated the issues on the table, but is there a particular question you're asking in this regard?
I can respond to the questions from the chat.
Yeah, sure. Andrew, please go ahead. Okay. Please go ahead, Mr. Sime, until we have Andrew.
Oh, okay, very good. So let me repeat the question. Some issues may be due to organizational bureaucracies and lackadaisical attitude of team members. Team members and your superior may forget to respond to pending issues, and these can cause repetitions, resubmitting memos and presentations. Excellent. This is a really good question. So what you're showing here are what we call day-to-day frictions that happen in many organizations. And the way we would approach it is look at the underlying issues. In other words, what is fundamentally an issue? What is the root cause? And we'll look at tackling it at the root. And from the examples you've given, I can see that what's at the root of some of these would be things that we could use tools for. In other words, some ways that we can improve trust in day-to-day activity is to use good tools that do the remembering for us. In other words, we have scheduling apps, that also look at things you're supposed to do so that you don't try remembering it all the time. And the way we look at this in terms of trust is to say, well, is it character or is it capability? So here we're saying it's capability. Now, is that capability based on a large volume of work to be done? Okay, so here we're saying that maybe we should look at reducing that volume of work or automating that volume of work and maybe prioritizing all the items in that large volume, and then we can use a good tool to help us do that. So with the use of a very good tool, something that looks at a large number of tasks to be done, but can prioritize them in terms of importance, and that means that you're always on top of everything and you'll know what's most important. So some of these things you mentioned can be solved in terms of tools. They can increase your capability by using good tools. Does that help? Does that answer your question? Now, in terms of the attitudes, this is where we look on the character part. And here we're saying that what's the aspect of somebody's character that leads to this lackadaisical attitude? And there we would like to attack that from the character perspective. And sometimes it helps to look at causes. In other words, what is it that's behind it? Is it something in their past? Is it something outside of the organization? Or is it something in the organization? And once we find the attitude, we'll help them know or practice the correct behavior. Very often, when you show people their behavior and you help them understand what's causing it, it makes it much easier for them to change behavior. And what we would do is help them to come up with new habits, new daily practices that help them shift from the old behavior of a lackadaisical attitude to the new behavior of a more assertive or a more speed-focused behavior. So what it boils down to is understanding the root of the problem, looking at the options, and making sure that we implement the options in a way that's comfortable for the people concerned. I hope that answers the question for Andrew.
Andrew, let us know in chat.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you very well. That answered the question very well. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, there's a
Okay.
question from Ibuko.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, this fantastic presentation. As part of the audit, do you have a questionnaire for the staff and management? Do you also look at the angle of the management trusting the staff? I ask because your talk seems to focus on the staff trusting management.
Excellent question. Excellent question. Let me take it one by one. In terms of the practical approach, yes, we would have questionnaires, but we don't focus very much on the questionnaires. What the questionnaires give us is a general area of where the problems might be. So we take the data and we use the data from the questionnaires to focus on specific areas. And then once we have those areas, we will now talk to the staff, sometimes in teams, sometimes in departments, sometimes one-on-one, and we will get to root causes. And we will make sure that we not only identify, but we reach a lot of clarity in terms of the data that we want to use to look for all the friction that are in the organization. Now, in terms of the angle that we look at, management trust in staff, it's 360. In other words, it's all round. It's not just management trust in staff, it's staff trust in management, it's staff trust in other staff, it's leaders trust in other leaders. So we see trust as 360-degree behavior. It's not one person or one group to another group. What we found, though, is that because leaders have more responsibility and they have more influence, if you start with leaders and build trust internally with the leaders, we'll find that through their responsibility and through their interaction, they can extend trust through the organization. It's a little bit like a ripple. If you drop a stone in water, you find that the stone ripples. There's a wave that ripples outwards. So when you start with maybe the MD or the chief executive, that internal trust that we build in that chief executive, when they start extending it to the people that report to the chief executive, they build their trust. And they now report to a larger number of people. And that extension of trust will now move to the next level and the next level and so on. And it ripples down the organization. But we don't make it one way only. But it's if you wanted to start somewhere, it often helps if you start with the senior executives. However, part of the program would involve training staff on trust so that they build it themselves. In other words, we want to end up with everybody having the right skills. Okay. And our approach would be, where can we get the most leverage in terms of applying skills to everybody? So does that answer your question?
Ibukun, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. So Sheena Olaosun says, can one say voters' apathy in Nigeria is as a result of lack of trust in the political leaders?
Wow,
From the
great problem.
C-square maybe.
Sensitive problem. Great problem. Yeah. And you know, in this talk, we talked about the external environment and the challenges of the external environment. And what you're hinting at is that, can we apply the trust principles to Nigeria as a whole, especially political leaders? And the answer is yes, because these principles are universal. And what I'll do is just give you one little example, and you can sort of imagine the impact of this in terms of politics, in terms of people, in terms of voting. And you know, we talked about 13 behaviors. One of those 13 behaviors is to declare your intent. Declare your intent. Imagine what would happen if every political leader declared their intent. Imagine what would happen if every voter declared their intent. That declaration of intent is something that would unify everyone and help to align everyone to have good elections. Okay, so this is one example where, when you have societal problems, we can apply these principles society-wide. And just one behavior out of 13 is declaring intention in a way that others can see it and give you feedback, in a way that others can observe your actions compared to the intention you declared. Okay, so that's like an example of saying that the principles, the practices, the tools are universal, and they can be applied in different situations, even in elections in Nigeria.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah.
But thanks a lot. I mean, any other questions? Anyone wants to come off mute to ask? We have 1 or 2 more minutes. We can take just maybe one question. Anyone wants to come off mute, it's fine, or put in chat. Okay, I see something in chat, just to confirm. Okay. Okay, great. EI says the presentation was very insightful. Thank you very much. Great. Maybe one question from me, Mr. Osime, because I was just thinking about the matter of trust and how sometimes, senior leaders look at it and say trust. I mean, that's such a soft issue. I mean, if you do certain things, trust will definitely come. Like the case of do A and then you definitely find B. But what you've spoken to is the need for intentionality in ensuring that we can each of us, work to restore trust, to build trust, to extend trust. What if you're in a case or a situation where the trust has already been broken down, completely eroded, and this is a senior leader with their team of 10, and they really want to get trust back on so that people can, bring their best selves to work and do their best work, and achieve the high velocity results we're looking for. What do they need to do?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Let me summarize your question to make sure I've understood it.
Okay.
Imagine you have a situation in an organization, and some of the leaders, or maybe even the leader, has had a bad history in terms of trust. In other words, they have not been applying trust the way that is in the best interests of the organization. And you have a history of distrust within the staff of the organization. So how do we turn that around? How do we turn that distrust into future trust going forward? If that's your question, then
Yes.
then the answer is, or one answer or one approach is to admit errors. In other words, you've got to be able to admit that what was done before was wrong, and then you've got to have a sense of, I want to correct things. In other words, you want to correct mistakes, and this goes beyond apologizing. In other words, it's not enough to say, okay, I'm sorry I did these things in the past. Let's go forward. No, what you've got to do is to say, this is how I'm going to correct everything I've done in the past. And it's this attitude of correction, as well as the tools and techniques and processes that you're going to use to correct it, that's how you go forward. And that's an example of one, I'll call it one of the levers that you can use. Let me make it even more specific. Let's say that in the past, trust had been depreciated because as a leader, I would shout at my staff. Okay, so what would I do? Well, I would acknowledge that this is how I used to be. Then I would give them my understanding of what happened. In other words, this is why I was behaving that way. And I see now that you didn't see my intent. You focused on my behavior. And my behavior led to distrust. And I would acknowledge that. And I would say, in future, I would stop shouting and talk to you in a more pleasant, in a more gentle way. And I would put in place something that allows me to create the habit of speaking in a way that is conducive to exchanging ideas. And I might even designate somebody as somebody who's going to report to me weekly on my performance in terms of doing this. In other words, I would start a habit of changing my behavior, and I would have some external person or some external system to monitor and report back to me this change. And this will be one of several things that I would do with the help of my staff to implement these changes. And remember, in the full program, we've got 13 behaviors. So this will be just one of those 13 behaviors. And the approach we would use is to say, for this organization, for this challenge, out of the 13 behaviors, which 5 or 6 would be most effective? We would look at those 5 or 6 and implement them. With those 5 or 6, you might get 80 or 90% of results. Ogona, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And Ibuku said in chat that yes, accountability from a leader, is really, really
Excellent. Yes.
powerful. Yes,
Yes.
very true.
Yeah.
Wow, we have fortunately, unfortunately, come to the end of this session today. It has been such an amazing one, and I've had a good time just learning, but of course also thinking about my action, after now to see what are those behaviors I need to start to, take action on. And I hope that everyone on the call is already thinking like that, because really I think it starts, like Mr. Osime has said, in many ways with self-trust, trusting myself and being able to show myself trustworthy for me to want to attract trust from anyone. So we are happy to, have a deeper conversation with you. We are open to giving you a complimentary joint discovery session. So please feel free to reach out to us through this number or email on the screen. It was good that you joined us. We're excited that for the kind of change that can happen in your organization. And we hope that next month you join us again. But again, let's have the conversation. Let's keep the conversation open and let's continue to discuss how we can improve trust in our organization. Thank you so much, Mr. Tony Osime, for doing such a great job of delivering this. And thank you, everyone, for making our time from your busy schedules to be with us today. Thank you. Once again, your host, Egwanowi, and looking forward to seeing you next month. Bye.